evidence on how they handle reconciliation, etc., etc. If it's a book on maqasid, definition of maqasid, classification of maqasid, validation and evidence for maqasid during the Quran, in the Sunnah, life of Sahaba, etc., etc., and then the different levels of priorities, etc., etc. What we have tried to do here has been to present it in a way that is simpler, to focus on those aspects of this huge subject. Usulul Fiqh is a huge subject. To focus on those things that would be useful for a first aider. So if you've got somebody who wants to learn first aid, and you've got somebody who wants to learn medicine, we don't teach him everything. We look at the whole of medicine and say, what does somebody require for first aid? What does he need to know? So it's really picking what helps handle emergency situation, but also helps him realize who to consult on what issue, what to do in the meantime. So there's that traditional method we've mentioned, which is very complicated, looking at the reason and revelation working together. Some discuss usulul fiqh as just describing the job of a mujtahid, how to maximize certainty in representing the Prophet. The maxims of Islamic law are usually just mentioned. This is the maxim based on this and its own sub-maxims. Chronological development of the methodology for the Sunnah. And some look at the origin of usul and more historical presentation, and the combination of these in various books. So one is the understanding that authenticity is insufficient for truth. Okay, to get to the truth of the matter, it's not enough that it comes from the Quran. Quran is authentic, nobody argues about that one. But then sometimes what the Quran says is not clear. What did it mean? It's dhanni dilala sometimes. So while it's qati thubut, we are certain about its authenticity, the meaning may be ambiguous. The Quran may be silent on some issues, and so ijtihad has to come in. Here we write the kufr toilet and the Muslim kafir. Exactly, what does it mean? Somebody, again, this is just to see how people use and misuse. Somebody said, you can spit on the ground and use your foot to just cover it with sand. At the time of the Prophet, people who wanted to urinate just go to one quiet corner, urinate there, and that's all. You didn't have to waste a lot of water. Today, you go to the toilet and you spit or you urinate and you flush nearly 20 liters of good drinkable water. That is wastefulness. And the Quran says, Innal mubazzirina kanu ihwana shayateen. Those who are wasteful are the brothers of the shayateen. Wa inna shaitan li rabbihi kafura. And shaitan is to his Lord ungrateful. Where did we copy this technology of toilet thing from? We copied it from the kuffar, somebody says. But then man tashabbaha biqawmin, whoever imitates the people, fahuwa minhum, then you are one of them. And how an action can be interpreted, you can use a hadith, man tashabbaha biqawmin, you can use verse of the Quran, innal mubazzirina, and you reach a conclusion. But imagine how many other things you can conclude. And this is why it's important to follow the rules of interpretation, to know the meaning as it was understood by the Prophet and the Sahaba, and not assign new meanings to things. Ijtihad and the importance of consistent methodologies and mujtahid. So number one, if you are going to do ijtihad, as we said a little earlier, it can't be arbitrary. So this is where the schools have developed. It has to be consistent, where scholars have refined the methods and they have agreed on how to approach issues. And there's a qualification for somebody who is a mujtahid. You know, knowledge of Quran, knowledge of Sunnah, knowledge of usul, knowledge of urf and context, knowledge of this, knowledge of that. And where you can't get one person with all that knowledge, which is very difficult today, at least have a fatwa council where that group has all the fields concerned. So as they discuss, they are able to look at it through various filters and various perspectives. And the big job, of course, of a mujtahid is how to represent the Prophet in his absence. So what we do is we give an exercise. So we'll ask everybody, write down criteria, 5 guidelines for anybody who is going to represent your boss in your office when they are not there. Okay? So if your big boss is not there and decisions have to be made, the boss has traveled, gone on Umrah, we can't get in touch with them, etc., etc. We've got 1 week to reach some conclusions, and you can't get in touch with them. What would be the guidelines? Another way of putting it is, how would you want to be represented if you are not around? So say, brother, you said, I'm going to be traveling somewhere. I'll not be available for this period of time. In my absence, if any issue comes up, this is how I want the decision to be made. What would be the guidelines? So whether it's the boss, whether it's the whoever, go and prepare your guidelines. And somebody starts writing, okay, in my office, if the boss is not around, we'll speak to the deputy. Or we'll look at, sorry? Very good. The policies the office already has, certain acts, certain things that are already written, that even if the boss is around, he would follow those ones. We would consult with people who know the boss very well. If it's a family issue, we will discuss with the boss's wife and maybe the family members. Or has the boss done, has this problem been faced by the boss before? Or something similar where we can do qiyas, reasoning by analogy. And so there we introduce the tools of ijtihad, of why the Sahaba were important in ijtihad. Why when the Prophet ﷺ or the Quran is silent on something, why do we need to know what is their ijma on? And so with that, we help people understand how the mujtahid imams gradually evolved usulul fiqh. How did it, when people had questions at the time of the Prophet, it was straightforward. You ask the Prophet ﷺ. After that, Sahaba would consult each other. After that, the fuqaha then came in. Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi, of course, articulated his methodology. Others had not articulated, but it made others start thinking about, let's write it down. Let the books on usul be written down on the methodology. So the methodology is not in your head, and you know what you are doing, but it's written down where we can see and critique it. And of course, the various values, fard or wajib, mustahab, mubah, makruh, and haram. But also see how the Hanafis have other criteria. Hanafis distinguish between fard and wajib. Hanafis distinguish 2 types of haram, makruh tahrimi and makruh tanzihi. Sorry, 2 types of makruh, and then haram. Then concerning sin and certainty when speaking in God's name. So of the various categories, fard wajib is the one that contains sin if you omit it. Okay, so it's compulsory to do it, and there's a sin if you don't do it. Mustahab encouraged, mubah, and haram is the opposite of fard. Here is where we say we are not talking of the word difference between halal and haram. When we're looking at a more technical definition. The opposite of haram is fard. Haram is sinful if committed. Fard is sinful if omitted. Just as the opposite of mustahab is makruh. And because there is sin involved, only Allah punishes sin. And that's why you have to be very careful regarding the evidence you bring for saying something is fard or the evidence you bring for saying something is haram. Otherwise, you lie in God's name. And these are areas we need, from the very beginning, people need to realize the need for evidence. Yeah, the need for consistency. Otherwise, you make blood of an innocent person halal if you don't know methodology. And then, of course, we look at the Abu Hanifa categorizations. We look at what we call the mujtahid's fishing equipment. Okay? Yeah. So if you look at mujtahid as a fisherman who goes fishing, he needs a rod, hook, line, bait. He buys the line from a tackle shop. The people who sell the line and make the line may not know how to catch fish. The person who makes a hook may not even live near water. The person who uses a fishing rod doesn't know where to get bait from. So what we try to explain is the encyclopedic nature of a mujtahid. So mujtahid is the person, so appreciate, muhaddithun are useful, mufassirun are useful, everybody is useful, but it's the mujtahid that is like the fisherman. He is the one who knows which rope to get or which string to get, which size of hook, which bait, where to put it. He is the one who is good with the fishing. And so the subject of usul handles not just Quran and Sunnah, but what to do when that's not enough. What to do when those don't solve the problem. Does he look into ijma and qiyas? So he is trained to handle situations when he has caught a big fish and he knows this fish he can't pull this one out. What does he do? Okay. What does he do? He's the one who knows what to do. If you tell him there's a big fish here, but the hook is too small, he's the one who knows, no problem. Put many small hooks on the line and put the bait. If you are not a skilled fisherman and you don't know the behavior of fish, you don't know even which bait to put for which hook, which fish. We use a number of other metaphors. So one is the fishing for the sunnah, okay? Where he wants to get as close as possible to what would the Prophet do in this situation. The Prophet is not in this situation. But if the Prophet was in this situation, what would be closest to the sunnah? What would he most likely do? That's what the mujtahid is trying to do. Yeah. That's what all these equations and methodologies of ijtihad are trying to do. They're trying to do something where finally, if he is right, he gets 2 rewards. If he is wrong, he gets 1 reward. Why? At least he did his best to solve the problem and get as close as possible to the teachings of the Quran and Sunnah. And that's why in the methodologies of ijtihad, they look at what is next closest to the Quran and Sunnah. Yeah, this one thinks amal, this one thinks ijma, this one thinks this one thinks that. So we look at the equipment and the tools that the mujtahid or this fisherman is using. Quite a number of them. Quran, we look at hadith, we look at ijma or what is called consensus, and we look at the tools the various schools use. The Malikis like the tradition or amal of Ahl al-Madinah, reasoning by analogy or qiyas, custom or urf, opinion or fatwa of Sahaba, which is also called ra'i of Sahaba, etc. But we also have a question. What is the best tool? What is the best tool? If I put it as a question here, if you are a carpenter and you have a box, okay, a toolbox, what will be in that toolbox? Screwdriver, hammer, saw, a wrench, drill, screws, pincers, chisel, all of that. what is the most important and the most useful, or should I say, what is the most important tool in the toolbox? Excellent. You know, a lot of young people say the saw, no the hammer, no the ruler, no the this. Exactly. It depends on what's the job. Yeah. And that is why sometimes the scholars change madhabs. Yeah. Because suddenly they realize, you know what, for this issue, our own is not the solution. The Hanafis have the solution for this Islamic finance issue. No problem. A lot of Islamic banking is Hanafi fiqh. Yeah. On this issue, even on the question of a woman who is raped and she is pregnant, what should be the fatwa? Can she have an abortion? Even the Hanbali go with Hanafi. Because Hanafi take it, she can have an abortion before 120 days, before 4 months. Okay, they look at it as makruh, not haram. So in Boko Haram, when women were pregnant in Algeria, similar type of thing, and they asked Uthaymin, Allah yarhamuhu, what to do, he gave them a fatwa from the Hanafi school. Here also. Okay, it's not when we want, but when another madhab attains a maqasid or maslaha better than our own. When it's more appropriate. Yeah. Mm. Interesting. Very interesting. So, again, you know, what tool is the mujtahid going to use depends on the situation. But that is why it is useful to know what do other madhabs have. The reason is because if you only know your madhab, you can sometimes be constrained. Yeah, where you can't solve a problem and you start wanting to do fresh ijtihad, whereas this problem has already been solved by somebody else. And if you go fishing, you know, you're catching, you go to catch fish, and you find somebody is down there. He is catching. He's catching again. You've been here for 1 hour, you didn't catch. You know, what's going on? No. Oh, yeah, but that is where somebody realizes, you know what, yeah, I've been using squid. Hmm. But yeah, but this is where sometimes you have a shoal of a particular fish that have come in an area, and they prefer a particular bait. You need to be quick to change bait. I remember one who he was in the Alaskan area. So you know how they make a hole in the ice because there's a lake that has been iced up. So they make a hole in the ice and then they put the line in and catch fish. So this guy, he put his thing and he was waiting. He doesn't catch anything. No problem. He's cold and he's still waiting, fishing. This young man comes and just just greets him. He goes some meters away. 2 minutes later, wham! He's caught a fish. Good one. I'm like, wow, okay, beginner's luck. 2, 3 minutes later, another one. 2, 3 minutes later, another one. What's he doing? So he goes and he sees the guy and he asks him, hey, I've been here all this time, I've not caught anything. You know, like, what are you doing differently? You're using worm, I'm using worm. So the guy says, Ruraf, Rurif, Reverm, Vrum. He said, what? He said, Ruraf, Rurif, Reverm, Vrum. Do you have a problem? You have to keep the worms warm. That was his solution. Yeah, you have to keep the worms warm. But the point being, for a mujtahid, on a more serious note, sometimes a methodology doesn't work, and you have to see what somebody else doing differently or better. What other tool is somebody using that may be better than your own tool? In the military, there's what they call the commander's intent. So when in a platoon you are told, go somewhere, do this, do that, there's always an intention. Okay, there's always a maqasid, there's an objective. So say, for example, a military commander tells his platoon, we need to go up on that hill. There we can get to send a signal with our radio, and you're holding the radio. We need to get on that hill, send a signal for reinforcements. Why? Because we realize these people have another weapon we didn't know about. So we need to inform people very quickly, get reinforcement, and solve this problem. But to get there, we need to pass through some enemy lines. What is the objective? Anybody? What is the objective? Of all the fighting we are going to do. This whole strategy, the objective is what? To win? To defeat the enemy? Peace? This strategy of we go fight, 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 get to the hilltop and send a signal. What do we want? Sorry? Get reinforcement. That's what we want. And so the question is this the best way of getting reinforcement? Okay? If as we are busy struggling to get reinforcement, this person is shot, this person is shot, we knew some of us would be shot on the way. Okay? Do we just keep going on? What about if the guy holding the radio is shot? Do we keep going on? Okay? The person holding the radio is more valuable than the other person. Why? Because we need the radio to send the signal. If he says, I forgot my weapon, no problem, we can go. If he says the radio is not working, we don't just say, let's go. Why? Because if we get there, we can't even send the signal. And so the scholar has to be always with the maqasid at the back of his mind. Usul, and it's not just a methodology that's an end in itself. Yeah. Usul of fiqh is supposed to come with a solution to a problem. It's like a doctor. The objective is not to give medicine. The objective is for somebody to get better. And if the medicine is not working, we leave this doctor, we go to another one. Or the doctor stops giving this medicine, he starts giving another one. When somebody comes to a mujtahid or a mufti for a fatwa, he is looking for either a solution to his problem, but not for his problem to be worse. You either have an answer to a question, you can help, or you can reduce the harm, but not make it more painful, not increase suffering. And so the commander's intent is very important. And this is where we also look at the mujtahid as being like Master Chef. Have you seen these programs on television? Master Chef. Yes. And yeah, and you know the competition. What do they give you? So limited time. And sometimes they just give you stuff. You don't even know what they are going to give you. Yeah. And no even recipe. They just tell you, produce something nice with this. That's the competition. And you got 20 minutes, or you got 30 minutes, or whatever. You don't choose what you'll be given, but you have to make the best with what you have. Okay? Sometimes the mujtahid comes and finds a problem. On this issue, no verse of the Quran to help him. That would have solved this problem. No hadith. Okay, so let's take, for example, organ transplant. Okay, organ transplant, just to be practical. Which verse of the Quran will we use to tell us whether I can give my kidney to my friend or my wife or somebody? Can I give my kidney? Can I donate my blood? Okay. Which verse of the Quran? Okay. Is that talking about blood transfusion? Okay. So, okay, good. So you, no, this is very good. Okay. Which analogy? Okay. Okay. So this is what you call long qiyas. Okay. Yeah. But going with maslaha. Okay. What's in the interest? So here you are looking at the maqasid of saving life. Okay. So you're thinking, you're actually looking maqasid. Yeah. It's not qiyas with the Prophet did or the Prophet said and therefore. Okay. Why? Because we never had anything similar to organ transplant in those days. This is a very new thing. To move blood from here to another, the moment it gets out, it clots. Okay. So we don't have anything clear from the Quran on organ transplant, on that topic. We don't have anything in the hadith about it. We don't have anything in the ijma of Sahaba or the early scholars about it. We don't have something even similar to it that we can do with qiyas. It didn't exist during the time of Sahaba, so we don't have even ra'i of Sahaba that we will say, well, Umar bin Khattab said this about organ transplant. Very true. So it is when you find, like for the mujtahid, you know where we just say like master chef, you don't know what you will get. When somebody brings a problem, that's when you look and you say, okay, no Quran, no sunnah on this, no ijma, I can't do qiyas, I can't do, what do you call it, ra'i of Sahaba. Okay, so we are left with commander's intent to save life. Maslaha, or istihsan, or saddu zariya, this issue of values. You could say it's common sense, exactly. So what scholars try to do is how to make sure the common sense is guided. Yeah, that it's properly guided by the principles. Yeah. And this is why, again, appreciating that it's not everything that has the ingredients you want. When we say Maghrib prayer is fard, okay? When we say Maghrib prayer is compulsory, any terms and conditions? Such as? Time. Okay. Age. Purity. Intellect. Okay. No pregnancy, what do you call it? Monthly haida or nifas. No, none of those monthly bleedings or whatever. In other words, even when you say this is fard or this is haram, even though we don't say so, there's that understanding, yes, under certain conditions, or what they call the ahkamul wad'iyah. So terms and conditions apply, as they say in business, or ceteris paribus. All things being equal, this is haram, and this is fard, and this is mustahab, and this is makruh, and this is haram. The mujtahid has to be sensitive to terms and conditions. Because when they change, the hukum will have to change. Yeah. Maghrib is fard when the time has come. For the person who is pure. For this, for that, so you have the sabab and shurut and mani and all the things that, what you call again, the factors that surround, the assumptions that surround the hukum. And this is why sometimes hukum change with situation. Because once you change a situation, you find the context now is serious poverty. It wasn't like somewhere before. And when Umar noticed poverty, he suspended. There was a famine, food shortage, etc. poor people are going to start stealing, so he suspended the had. The Quran and Sunnah has not changed. But some of the environmental conditions that are assumed to be there for this hukum, those changed, and so the fatwa will have to change. And you have to do what some would call a rukhsa, license concession. So we discussed this issue of master chef, more examples of how sometimes the mujtahid or the mufti doesn't have all the tools at his disposal, or they just don't apply. And this is where the issue of safety net, insurance, boundaries. Remember, this is a course we give for people who are, many of them don't already know this subject, so they are approaching it for the first time. So we use a lot of metaphors to make it easy to understand. Let's take the safety net, for example. Where do you see safety nets being used? Okay, so some stadiums, construction buildings, yes. Circus, yes. Exactly, where people are doing gymnastics, trapeze, all this acrobatics, etc. And what is the use of the safety net? Yeah. Yeah, safety. So safety nets allow you to do your acrobatics without the fear that somebody may die. Okay? Allows you to do your construction without the additional fear that somebody may die. So it's like insurance. It's like life insurance. Okay? It puts a boundary for the risk. The worst thing that will happen is you will fall, but the net will catch you. Yeah, you won't break your neck, you won't die. In Usulul Fiqh, there are some tools that play the role of safety nets. Maslaha, Saddu Zariya, Istihsan. Istihsan, juristic preference or equity, they usually call it in law. Where, as the scholar is doing his, like intellectual gymnastics with, okay, this ayah and this hadith and this means and this qiyas and whatever, the moment his conclusion is going to create problem, he will not go with that one. Istihsan will come in to override qiyas. Or he'll look, no, this is creating problem, yeah, we'll go with maslaha. So different schools. So in the Hanafi, istihsan, Hanafis don't recognize maslaha and saddu zariya in Hanafi fiqh. But that's because the Hanafi definition of istihsan is so broad that it does the job of maslaha and istihsan and saddu zariya. So the Maliki will have like 3 spanners. You know spanner? Different size of spanner. So there's a small one, there's a slightly bigger one, and there's the much bigger one. This one is called maslaha, this is saddu zariya, this is istihsan. The Hanafis have adjustable spanner. So it's just one, and they call it istihsan. Yeah. So even though they have different, no, we don't recognize, yeah, he doesn't need your own because he's got this one. Yeah, so, it's what you call like an academic debate. They're just different names, but if you say, what are you doing? It's the same thing. Concern for values, concern for maqasid. We don't want people to get harmed. If a fatwa is going to end up killing people, if this fatwa is going to end up cutting the hands of poor people, they will bring in maslaha and say, suspend it. Yeah. Or they will bring saddu zariya. Yes, everything is halal except what is haram. But this halal is allowing us to have this problem. Okay. Yes, it's halal for you to hold weapons. Sahaba had weapons. Everybody, everything. And you can hold weapons, defend yourself, whatever, whatever. But the country realizes, yeah, wait a minute, but the last people who died are gang warfare, using small guns. You know what? Yeah, we will ban handguns. Why? Because the harm is greater than the benefit. And even though it was halal, and we are banning it, it's because of a greater good. So that's what they will call saddu zariya. during the time of the caliphs, Umar bin Khattab, and we find a lot of certain things haram. Don't carry alcohol, don't sell it, don't witness it, don't... What's the problem? The problem is the drinking and intoxication. But everything that supports it is also stopped. La taqrabu zina. What's the problem with... No, no, no. It's the zina that's the problem. But anything that's going to lead there, we will block it. During the time of Umar bin Khattab, he noticed that people were leaving Medina to go to the desert and meet some of the Arab, the nomadic, the Arab deserts who were bringing things to sell in town. They will meet them there, buy the things from them, tell them, okay, you go. They will then come to town and double or triple the price. Any verse of the Quran saying you can't do it? No, nothing in hadith. Al-asl fil asha libaha, it's mu'amalat, whatever, whatever. But this is causing harm. So Umar banned it. Yeah, Saddu Zariya. Saddu Zariya usually comes in to make prohibited something that is normally halal. It's ibaha. Yeah, especially where the benefit of permitting it is now less. The harm is greater. However, you have to measure harm and benefit always. So for example, you would say, if I said, the last people who were killed, murder, in Maldives were killed with what? Most likely knife. Okay? Do we say that since the last people who were killed with knives, let us ban knives? No more selling of knives in the Maldives. But look at the benefit. Oh, we cut fish. We cut, like think of all the things we use knives for. So it's not because it can lead to harm that you ban it, but only if the harm is greater than the benefit. So here, the benefit of permitting is still greater than the benefit of banning. Yeah. So we will allow it, but we will find another way of solving that problem. But not Saddu Zariya. You look for another method. So this is where the mujtahid really needs to study these, because they become, these backup tools, safety nets, maqasid becomes like a compass. Okay? You always want welfare of the community. Protecting the lawgiver's intent, or the prophetic intent, the spirit and the purpose of Sharia. Bringing good, removing harm. That has to always be protected. So in preventing harm in the use of ijtihad, you have these maqasid tools. They are like compass, and we've already mentioned them. Okay? Juristic preference or istihsan. Juristic preference or istihsan allows the scholar to take his own discretion in whether to go with urf or qiyas or this or this. He looks at what is most appropriate to the maqasid, and blocking the means to something that is harmful, something that was originally halal. Of course, you have istisla, raf'ul haraj, different names, different madhabs use. So I think Shafi would use istisla and raf'ul haraj instead. Others will use. So different names. But when you say, what are they doing? Same. What is the most important safety net principle and tool? And you'll really find this is semantics. It becomes an academic exercise. Yeah, the most important safety net principles and tools, really, it's just a combination of these. Depends on who is talking, how they define it. So the need to be very careful when speaking in Allah's name. Yeah, when we're going to talk about any topic, yes, jihad is from Quran. Yes, food and what is halal and haram is from the Quran and the Sunnah, and this is from Quran and Sunnah. But let's be very careful. What is it that is Allah speaking, and that's what He meant, and what is this is our interpretation. Authenticity, scholars have no problem with Quran and Sunnah. The area where difficulties come is what's the meaning and whose meaning. So there's what they call dhannid dilala. Dhannid dilala is where you have a verse of the Quran or a hadith where nobody questions the authenticity, but the meaning, it could mean this, it could mean this. The mufassirun have different tafsir for this ayah. And so you could get differing opinions there. It is important to know more about the Sunnah, especially its implications. And this is an area that we find very, very important for young people. What is sunnah? Okay, something if you do, you will be rewarded. If you leave, you will not be punished. Eating food with hands. If you do it, you'll be rewarded. If you leave, eating food with spoon. Mubah? Sunnah? Okay. But this is where it's very useful to know what do you mean by sunnah. Yeah. Okay. So this is his own qiyas. Yeah, this is analogy. So it's very important to know what did the Prophet say and what is somebody's analogy. Just so that we don't say the Prophet said this about spoon. No, this is analogy. So on the topic of sunnah, what is sunnah? Sunnah has different meanings, depends on the field. So for scholars of hadith, when they say we follow kitab wa sunnah, what is sunnah? Okay, so that's another definition of sunnah. Everything the Prophet said, did, or approved of. When the Prophet... Okay, so let's go one by one. So let's go with what the Prophet said, did, or approved of. If the Prophet approved of it, maybe he was silent about it. Who did it? Means the Sahaba. So everything the Prophet said, did, or approved of, that a Sahaba said, did. Are we together? So Sunnah is more than just what the Prophet said and did. It's also what others did that he approved of, or he was silent over, but didn't object. Not that it was recommended, it was just done. Okay? Azl was just done. There are a number of things, they were just done. There are things the Prophet didn't do. He didn't eat lizard. Or this dub, this, what do you call it? Yeah, it's like desert lizard. Okay? He didn't eat it, but he had no problem others eating it. For some, sunnah is that tradition of the Prophet. The kind of things the Prophet did and approved of. Or saw and approved of. But we also have, when people say, we follow kitab wa sunnah, sunnah there they mean hadith. Okay? Sunnah means hadith. Yeah, just narrations. Yeah, just hadith, sunnah, all the same. They say sunnah mutawatir, they mean hadith mutawatir. Sunnah ahad, they mean hadith ahad. Another person says, oh, this prayer is fard. This other prayer is sunnah. Nafila. Very good. So there, sunnah, when I say this is a sunnah fast, it's not a compulsory fast, it's sunnah fast. There it just means mustahab, encouraged. Nafila, exactly. And then there's the one the brother made, where sunnah is viewed as the opposite of bid'ah. Yeah. So bid'ah is an innovation, a counterfeit. That's pretending to be sunnah, but it's not. So the key point here is, when somebody says, this is sunnah, you have to ask, what does that mean? Yeah. Which of the meanings of sunnah are you meant? Just that it was done, that's all? Because of the things that the Prophet did, some are fard, some are mustahab, some are mubah, some are makruh, some are haram. Yeah. You don't say the Prophet married 9, I'll marry 9. Yeah. You don't say the Prophet did everything, I'm going to do everything. Or just the Prophet made something compulsory on himself, you will make it compulsory on yourself. So need to be very careful when people talk about sunnah. But there's another side to the sunnah, that we try to share with young people to understand. So one is just careful how you use the word sunnah, because it becomes a very useful marketing tool sometimes for extremism. Oh, this is sunnah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Why? Oh, Prophet did it. Yeah, but did he recommend it? You are recommending it. Did the Prophet recommend it? No. But because the Prophet did it, and it's sunnah, you are presenting it as if we should all do. Did the Prophet punish thieves? Thieves. People who steal, saraq. Okay? Did the Prophet punish people who did zina? Yes. So once the evidence was clear, Prophet did it. Is it part of the sunnah? Yes. Can I go and punish somebody who did zina? Can I catch a thief? I caught a thief. I saw him. In fact, others were there. So no doubt that he stole. Can I cut his hand? No, not allowed. But it's sunnah. Quran says, follow Quran and sunnah. Atiullah wa atiur Rasul.
So if there is no one to do that, is it compulsory to us?
I'm saying yes, why not? No, but this is where we have a problem. Yeah. Because the Prophet did many things in different capacities. Okay? The Prophet sent armies. The Prophet signed treaties. The Prophet appointed you. You be governor of this place. You're governor of this place. You head the army. Prophet did it. So it's sunnah, right? لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Prophet is best example. Therefore, you know what? Yeah, I am going to send an army. I'm also going to sign treaty. And you know what? You'll be governor. When we conquer this place now, inshallah, you'll be governor. And this is an area that is very, very critical. To recognize the different capacities the Prophet operated in. And to see how did the Sahaba understand the Sunnah. That there were certain things the Prophet said and did in his capacity as a head of state. If you are not a head of state, you don't do it. Because the Prophet was head of state, and judge, and mufti, and family man, and an Arab, and a person with personal likes and dislikes, all in one person called Muhammad Rasulullah. Okay? The danger is everything he did, we say we will do. I am not a head of state. I'm not a judge. So you have to be, you have to be very careful about picking hadith. Oh, it's Sahih, it's in Buhari, Prophet did it. If you don't do it, you are not a good Muslim because Atiullah wa Atiur Rasul. And Allah says this is what you should do, and blah, 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 and suddenly you're talking as if you're a new leader.
Can we say that it is oversimplifying?
It is very oversimplifying. That is not how the Sahaba understood the Sunnah.
And also undermine.
Very, very important. Because we're trying to understand what are those topics that are useful in vaccination against extremism. And one of them is where somebody decides he is going to follow the Sunnah, but in a way that is contrary to how the Sahaba followed the Sunnah. And so scholars broke down the Sunnah in different categories. One, they looked at Sunnah that is Tashri and Ghayr Tashri. Which one has legal, legislative implications, and which one does not have legislative implications. So that's one broad way of classifying the Sunnah. So there are those things that are Sunnah that the Prophet did in his capacity as a messenger of Allah to humanity. Pray as you see me pray. That instruction is for everybody. Male, female. The moment you've reached the conditions for prayer, you pray the way the Prophet prayed. You take your rights of Hajj from me, the Prophet said. So you take your rights of Hajj from the Prophet. But then there were times when the Prophet ﷺ spoke in his capacity as a mufti. Mufti. Giving fatwa to your situation. I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to you. Doctor prescribed medicine for your dengue fever. Not your dengue fever, not your dengue fever. Your dengue fever. That's a mufti. So somebody comes to the Prophet ﷺ and asks him, is it okay to kiss my wife while I'm fasting? Prophet said, no problem. So he goes. Not long after, another person comes and asks the Prophet ﷺ, is it okay for me to kiss my wife when I'm fasting? Prophet said, no. Oh, okay, thank you. And he goes. Sahaba have a problem. Ya Rasul, so so what is it? Can you? One guy comes, you say it's okay. Another guy comes, you say it's not okay. But then Prophet gave his reasons. The first gentleman who came looked like an elderly gentleman, seems to have control. The second guy, very young. Say yes to him, it may lead to more problem for him. So I told him no. Yeah. So the question is, can a person kiss his wife during Ramadan? Answer, it depends. Who is it? And the concern for consequences. So one person was given a simple answer. Asal is ibaha. Permissibility, why? Because it's not prohibited. The other one is saduzariya. You say no, why? Because of what it could lead to. So this is the capacity, this is the Prophet speaking in his capacity as a mufti issuing a fatwa, where the answer is specific, it's not for everybody. Sometimes the Prophet spoke in his capacity as a president, commander-in-chief of the armed forces, head of state. And in his capacity of head of state, all right, we agree to treaty between our state and your state. That is not for anybody else to do. And even though the Sahaba did not like the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, they had no right to disagree with the president. Yeah. You don't like it? Is he your leader? Yeah, that is his prerogative. You can't go and start something else. That would be a rebellion. That would be treason. And then, based on, okay, we will fight this person, we will have treaty with this person, we will, all sorts of what you call presidential prerogatives. The Prophet ﷺ arranges the army during the Battle of Badr. Not in his capacity as a prophet receiving wahi, but in his capacity as a military general. So he arranges the army in a particular way. One gentleman who has more experience in fighting comes and says, Ya Rasulullah, this arrangement of the army, is this wahi? Aw huwa harb wal makid? Or is this your idea of military strategy? Prophet said, it's not wahi, but it's my idea of military strategy. The man said, then I have another idea. If you can move the troops in front of the wells of Badr, let the wells be behind us, so that when these people come, they don't get water, and da-da-da-da. Prophet said, good idea. So we have times when the Prophet ﷺ did things in his capacity as a military general, and if you have advice, no problem. This was not wahi. But that's how you find things the Prophet ﷺ did in his capacity as a judge. Punishment for this, punishment for that. If you are not a judge, you have no right to do that. If you are not a military general, you don't decide things. If you are not head of state, you don't make those decisions. You don't say because the Prophet did it, or said, or approved, automatically you now are head of state, judge, president, etc. This is a big area we make mistakes in, where we don't know where the rights of others and the responsibilities of others. You don't like the decision the leader made, he's the leader. You don't like the judgment of the judge, he's the judge. You don't like the judgment or the prescription the doctor made, he's the doctor. You don't like the position of the mufti, he's the mufti. So the need to appreciate the various levels of the sunnah, and this is one area that Ibn Ashur handles very nicely in this topic. Ibn Qayyim, a number of scholars, Imam Shawkani, handle this question of the implications of the sunnah. What do you mean by sunnah? Because a lot of abuse goes on in this area. Equations of the madhabs, we've already discussed that earlier today. We discussed BODMAS as the operating principles that guide the application. Consistency in the methodology of representing the prophets. And then, of course, the LCM, the lowest common multiple. What do they all have in common? Quran and Sunnah Mutawatir. That they have in common. After that, they start to differ. Yeah. If something is clear in the Quran and it's clear in Sunnah Mutawatir, if it's clear, They call that ma'alum min ad-din bid-darura. Those essential parts of the deen, core and kernel of the deen. That's the lowest common multiple, what everybody agrees on. After that, you move into evidence that has dhanni, whether dhanni thubut or dhanni dilala. Ijma, yeah, problem is ijma changes with time. And then ijma of sahaba sometimes different from ijma of mujtahids and ijma of whatever. So ijma, especially, there's a kind of ijma where there is a consensus on the meaning. No difference of the meaning, then they say that is qat'i dilala. So that kind of ijma, but as an independent source, you would find ijma changes.
So if it is ijma of Sahaba means all will be agreed.
Yes, ijma of Sahaba would be something all the Sahaba agreed on. But why some people have a problem with when somebody says there's ijma of Sahaba, the riwayah that it is ijma is itself not mutawatir. So one person says there's ijma. Exactly. The problem is, okay, one person says there's ijma. Did he go around? Did all of them come? But the problem is, ijma sukuti, you are quiet, why? Do you agree or just because you are quiet? Okay? We don't know. And that is why the challenge on ijma. And that's why they put it under the dhanni, not under the qat'i, because of the differences of opinion. So this issue of the lowest common multiple, very, very important. You know, what is the core of Islam, and where do we have ikhtilaf and khilaf and difference of opinion, where you agree to disagree agreeably, no fighting. Yeah, we don't need to fight about it. Why? This is somebody's ijtihad. This is how the Hanafi look at it. Yeah, this is how the Maliki look at it. You don't like Amal Madina? No problem, but you can't look at thousands of Malikis and millions of Maliki followers and you say it's all rubbish. Come on. Yeah. The same thing with the other madhabs. And so this question of the certainty of proof. How much certainty do we have that something is true? And this is applied to two things. It's applied to the authenticity and credibility, what they call the thubut, or the wurud if it's a hadith. And also applied to the meaning, what they sometimes call the dilala, or the implications. So, any piece of evidence that comes has two aspects of it. So it's like doctor's prescription. Okay? So this doctor gave me this prescription with this writing. Two questions. Number one, did this come from him? That's one question. If you say it came from him, any problem? No. So we have no problem it came from him. But could we face another problem? What's the problem?
It is clear.
Exactly. You know how doctors write. I don't know what he means. I think he is saying this. No, it's not that. No, we don't do that. No doubt it came from him, thubut. But dilala, what is he saying? We differ. So, when they say qat'i, they mean no disagreement. Okay? It's certain, explicit, unambiguous. Sorry, not meaning. Clear, no debate, no give certainty, closest to absolute truth. 2 plus x is equal to 5. What is x? Any difference of opinion? No. Qat'iyah. Dhanni means uncertain. We can guess what it means, but there's a level of probability, there's a level of presumption, there's a level of speculation, that is debatable meaning. It's not waham, it's not just guesswork. Approximately we know, but there's space for difference of opinion. So it is relatively true. Whatever opinion you hold, fine, maybe you are certain you are right with the possibility that you could be wrong. So it's like 2 plus x plus y is equal to 10. What is x? We can differ. It could be different things. Yeah, it could be 1, it could be, it depends on what y is. So if we look for what are we certain about in the Sharia, we have 4 combinations of thubut, dilala, and then the level of certainty with each one of them. Is it qat'i or is it dhanni? So on the qat'i side, explicit certain, no problem. Probable speculative presumption, zanni. On the issue of thubut and wurud, and also on the issue of dilala here. So you can have evidence that is qat'i thubut, and qat'i dilala. Okay? So under the qat'i, you can have qat'i thubut, qat'i dilala. So these 2. This pointer is not working too well. So you can have qat'i thubut, qat'i dilala. What does that mean? Qat'i thubut means it is Quran or Hadith mutawatir. So nobody argues about it. Hadith ahad, they can argue. Ijma, they can argue. Qiyas, they can argue. Ra'i of Sahaba, they can argue. But Quran, no argument. Hadith mutawatir has so many independent chains, nobody argues about it anymore. It's beyond the shadow of doubt, as they say in law. So that is qat'i thubut. If it is qat'i thubut and also qat'i dilala. So when you look at all the verses in the Quran, all the hadith on the topic, is there more than one meaning? How many Allahs are there? No difference of opinion. Is there Yawm al-Akhir? Is there a day of judgment? From all the ayah, this ayah, the final meaning, no more than one answer. There's a hereafter. Do angels exist? Yes. Should we pray 5 times a day? Yes. How many rakahs for Maghrib prayer? 3. When do we fast? Ramadan. Where do we go for Hajj? Makkah. Zina. Halal or haram? Haram. Based on what? Qat'i thubut, qat'i dilala. No room for disagreement. So that becomes that core, that thing that is ma'alum min ad-din bid-darura. That's the core of the deen. After that, then we have different other combinations. So qat'i thubut, qat'i dilala are the core of the deen. But then you can have qat'i thubut and dhanni dilala. You can have evidence that is qat'i thubut, it's in the Quran, but dhanni dilala. The mufassirun differ on what does it mean. Okay? Thalathatu quru. What does that mean for a woman's menstruation period? The period or the period of bleeding? And they differ. Because it is, yes, it is qat'i thubut, it's in the Quran, but it is dhanni dilala, they differ in meaning, they agree to disagree. Or it is dhanni thubut, it's a single chain hadith, or it's qiyas. But it is qat'i dilala. What does it mean is clear. But because it is dhanni dilala, you will find scholars differing on how to use it. Why? They don't have the level of certainty, so they will take Amal of Medina as superior to it. Or this one will take Ijma as superior to it. Or you can have dhanni thubut, dhanni dilala. It's a single chain hadith, and scholars differ on what does it mean. So you can have the various combinations. Qat'i thubut, qat'i dilala, qat'i thubut, dhanni dilala. Or you can have dhanni thubut, qat'i dilala, or dhanni thubut, dhanni dilala. But all combinations, any topic that is qat'i thubut, qat'i dilala, you will not find difference of opinion among scholars. Yeah. You will not even know madhab. So if I ask you, which is my madhab? In my madhab, we pray 5 times a day. Which madhab do I belong to? You can't know. Why? Well, no need for madhab. Why? It's already qat'i thubut. It's qat'i dilala. Madhab comes in the moment you have dhanni. Yeah. The moment there's dhanni, how do we manage dhanni? Then we need help. from ijma. We need help from qiyas. We need help from other tools. Then ijma, reasoning, sets in, and the scholars differ on how they handle that on some of the issues. So this is what we've already, the different combinations. No need to go into that. So that is qati thubut, qati dilala, qati thubut, dhanni dilala, dhanni thubut, qati dilala, and then dhanni thubut, dhanni dilala. This is the only one where we can talk with certainty. This is what Allah said, and this is what Allah means. We don't do takfir on any of these. This is area of khilaf. This area we disagree. This madhab says, that madhab said. If you see madhab having difference of opinion, it is here. This picture we've already seen about the different levels. The thing to remember here is fruit change with the season. Are we together? Yeah. Fruits change with the season. Fatwa changes with time. Fatwa changes with place. And the job of the ulama is to watch the season. Yeah. Is this fatwa getting old? When medicine is no more solving malaria, you know we need to find a new medicine. So, the legal maxims. This we just go through, I think, 1 or 2 slides. These are the traffic rules, we call them. How to move with your fatwa. Yes, your fatwa is good, but how do we check it with reality? So the first one, these are ground rules, qawaid al-fiqhiyah. Actually, before we go on to number 1, we explain what do we mean by maxims. When crossing the road, what is a maxim we teach our children? Okay. Okay, so that's a guideline. How do we say it as a maxim? Okay. Where I come from, they say look, they will tell you look left, look right, look left again. Okay, so just memorize that one. Growing up, every time you're going to cross the road, your mom will say look left, look right, look left again. That's all. Okay? Sorry? Aha. Very important. In Nigeria, we drive on the right-hand side. So if you're going to cross the road, or here also? Okay. So if you're going to cross the road, you have to look left. Why? That's where cars are coming. That's where motorcycle is coming. Would it be wise to simply say, just look left, if nobody, cross? Because there's very often one very clever driver who wants to go the wrong way. Okay? There's always somebody who doesn't want to follow the law. Okay, yes. He is the one driving. So, look left, look right. Why look left again? Yeah, maybe somebody came out of a turning. Maybe somebody increased their speed. Maybe. So, just hadda, just remember it and it'll save your life. Look left, look right, look left again. Clear? Now you go. Okay, here I thought you drove on the left. Yeah, somebody nearly hit me. Is where exactly, changing situation, changing fatwa. Have to be. Once I was in when I was studying, I did my master's in Edinburgh in Scotland, and they drive on the left. Okay, so soon after I registered, everything ready, I have my room in the hostel, everything. Because of the distance between the hostel and the classes, I bought a bicycle. So one day I got onto the road, early morning, you get onto the road, everything fine, and I see one car coming towards me. I move away. Stupid driver. Get on the car again, bus wants to hit me. I move around. What's wrong with these people? Oh, I'm driving on the wrong side. Yeah, me, that's the problem. Yeah, I came with Nigerian brain. Want to ride. So we explain that. Another explanation sometimes is in chemistry, they will say you add acid to water, not water to acid. Yeah. If you have a strong acid and you put water, it'll explode. It'll splash. So simple rules. If a woman or somebody is in the kitchen, anybody, a chef, and you have hot oil, you do not add water to hot oil. No, you can have hot oil to water, but not the other way around. Yeah. Yeah, it'll spit. So we explained that just what are maxims, just to make it simple. And we give, these are maxims of Sharia from verses of the Quran and Hadith. The scholars put 5 universal maxims. So 1, al-umur bi maqasidiha, matters are judged by the intentions behind them. Okay? Matters are judged by the intentions behind them. And you look at it in 2 ways. Here's a matter. We will judge it by its intention. What was the niyyah of this action? And that's how we are going to judge it. So, somebody is dead. Somebody gets killed. Action is 1. So say 2 people get killed. Same action. But one, you investigate and you find was an accident. Another one was deliberate. We will judge the first one as manslaughter. We will judge the second one as murder. And the punishment is different. Yeah. Why? Al-umur bimaqasidiha. So that is a little like innamal a'mal bin niyat. We try to get to that one. But al-umur bimaqasidiha is also looking at al-umur as being like amr. Actions, policies, anything. Bimaqasidiha will be judged based on the maqasid, the consequence, the objective that it fulfills. So this action looks good, but we see it is going to create harm. We will stop it. It's called saddu zariya. So al-umur bimaqasidiha has a twofold side. But what it means is we are interested in good intention, but we are also interested in good result. The outcome has to be in line with the maqasid of Sharia. We can't have good action leading to mafasid. No, al-umur bimaqasidiha. So it's an important maxim when judging affairs. What is the consequence? The importance of planning. The importance of not just good action, but consequence. So say, for example, somebody says, Maldives, what's your population? I hear about 400 million, 400,000. About 400,000 people on the island. Yes. I want to give you a gift. What gift? I will give you 100,000 laptops. Computers. Actually, we will divide it into 3. 30,000 laptops, 30,000 Android phones, and 40,000 Galaxy tabs. Sadaqah fi sabilillah. Are you happy with that sadaqah? You like it? Yes. And because in Nigeria, no problem. So, good intention. Do you need to ask permission of government before we give to do sadaqah? No. Is it the business of the government? No. It shouldn't be. Okay.
Yeah, there are rules. To distribute it, just like something Swiss was there.
Okay. But is it a good idea?
It's a good idea, of course.
Intention is good. But imagine your brother who is running an IT shop. He sells laptops. He sells phones. He is Maldivian. Will he be happy? No. Will the whole of your computer industry be happy? All the people who have invested in computers to bring them into the country, what happens to them? Crash business, poverty. You have good intention. You like your intention. Allah sees your intention. Innamal a'mal bin niyat. Between you and Allah, good. But for us, we look at the consequences and we say, wait a minute. I like your intention, but you know what will happen? These computers will come. All these business people in the repair on all this industry, they will crash. Why? We have brand new laptops that will replace all the old ones. Laptops will be cheap. People will be catching fish with laptops. It's so cheap, nobody wants them. Why? We've got over 30,000 good ones working. They go out of business, they have no job. Nobody wants their repair, nobody wants their services. So many of them leave the country. Why? Well, go and manage. Those are your skills. Then, after about 1 year, 1.5 years, the new laptops start having small problem. Nobody to repair. Yeah. Now you have a big problem. Why? Because then, who's the company that repairs this laptop? Where do the spare parts come from? You will all buy spare parts from that person. Now you see new price. Oh no, it's out of fashion, or it's out of model, or whatever. And that is why umur bi maqasidiha is not simply actions go with intention, but actions go with consequences. Sharia is interested in the consequence. Yeah, that's why, anyway, no need for going into details. The second one is certainty is not overruled by doubt. Al-yaqin la yazulu bishak. Certainty is not overruled by doubt. Simply, hatu burhanukum. Bring evidence. In everything, we want to weigh the evidence. We want more certainty than doubt. If this one has more evidence than this one, we go with the stronger evidence. Yeah. But this is telling Muslims we must be evidence-based in our approach to things. Yeah. Which we have to be as empirical as possible. You don't get somebody, he is sick. Mental illness, jinn. Go do ruqya. Yeah, we've got over 400 different mental illnesses. It could be any one of them. Why quickly go straight jinn for everything? It could be schizophrenia. It could be bipolar disorder. It could be some form of depression. It could be cerebral this. It could be so many things. Al-yaqin la yazulu bishak. Excuse me. So certainty is not overruled by doubt. Harm must be eliminated. Okay? Harm must be eliminated. You can't see problem and do nothing. Yeah. You can't allow harm to continue. Ad-darar yuzal. So any problem, whoever man ra'a minkum munkaran, the moment you see something is wrong, something is harmful, poverty, health, environmental problem, the moment it's a problem, we're supposed to help remove that problem. Crime, but also prevention, vaccination, anything to prevent problems. And then al-mashaqqa tajlibu taysir. Hardship begets facility. Hardship begets ease. Mashaqqa tajlibu taysir is telling us to be more victim-centric. So, this poor man in this environment is suffering from poverty. At darar yuzal, we will try and remove the poverty, but it takes time. While we are busy trying to remove the poverty, al-mashaqqa tajlib at-taysir. He is in mashaqqa. We have to relax some laws for him. Yeah, if he steals, we will not cut his hand. We need to be victim-centric. Have rahmah on people who are going through difficulty. Whatever that mashaqqa, whatever that cause of constraint, difficulty may be. And so you find a lot of rukhsa in Sharia for people who are traveling, women in their menstrual period, this and that. But these are just a few examples. Any situation where people are finding difficulty, the need to make opportunity for rahmah. And then the last one is al-ada muhakkama. Al-ada muhakkama. Sharia recognizes that Allah has created us in shu'uban wa qabail, different nations and tribes, lita'arafu, not for you to conquer the other one. Yeah, not for one culture to obliterate or be predatory on another culture, but to get to know one another. Actually, in human society, civilization has grown when you learn from the others. Yeah. Allama bil kalam. Allama al-insan ma, not allama al-muslimin. Allama al-insan ma lam ya'lam. And you find one civilization has a lot of knowledge and experience, like the Greeks. Muslims studied the Greek civilization and grew upon it and moved into a new civilization. But then we stopped learning. Others learnt our own and grew and went ahead of us. So all we can talk, oh, we started this and we started that one. But that's how individuals grow, that's how societies grow. Synergy. Get diversity and be able to build something new from it. But to respect cultural diversity. So scholars realize that when the Prophet ﷺ came, he didn't change everything in the Arabian culture. Yeah. If it was harmful, he changed it. If it was okay, he left it. Sorry? Yeah. Where there was threat, you conquer, but like Rafidin. And Persia. Yeah. If there's a threat. If there was no threat, you did sulhu. You did peace treaties. Okay? But on the cultural level, on the area of ada and urf, in fact, that's why in usul, urf is a source of hukum. Yeah. You respect people's culture. Yeah. Cultural norms, because culture has a maslaha role. It gives identity to people. You have your own handwriting. Do we say, no, forget your handwriting. Let's all move on to English. It's better, more universal. What is wrong with your own? Nothing. Serves you fine. Keep it that way. Be proud of it. I'm proud of my own, but I don't look down upon others. Why? My own is what Allah gave me. Alhamdulillah. Your own is what Allah gave you. Alhamdulillah. But in your own will be something that if I study, I will actually find useful that I didn't have. And in my culture and how we do things in Nigeria, if you study it, you will find some things you didn't have. Why? Every culture faced different challenges and overcome different challenges. And the challenge we solved 50 years ago, 30 years ago, 10 years ago, 100 years ago, if you study other people's histories, you begin to learn other ideas that help you. So, general principle we've already discussed. Everything halal except what is haram. So this is a general rule on bid'ah. You know, there's some difference of opinion among scholars on this, whether bid'ah can be good or bad, or bid'ah is always bad. You have difference of opinion among that, so we discussed that one. We will not spend time on that. So this one just is a very quick diagram showing what goes on in the head of the ulama. On issue to do with mu'amalat, social transactions, economics, administration, business, healthcare, education, medication, mu'amalat. Mu'amalat simply means it's not ibadah. Yeah, it's not tied to ibadah and aqidah, what you call deen in the narrow sense. It's more to do with dunya. Ibadah is vertical relationship between you and Allah. Mu'amalat is interpersonal relationship between you and another creation. So in areas of mu'amalat, everything is halal except what is haram. For something to be haram, you need evidence that you have a level of certainty about. So the first source of evidence is Quran. If Quran says something is haram, then everybody says it's haram. If it's not in the Quran, they look in hadith mutawatir. If hadith mutawatir say it's haram because these two are qati thubut, then everybody says it's haram. Everybody. So everybody agrees alcohol is haram, lahm al-khinzir is haram, zina is haram, all of that. Why? Because Quran, Sunnah mutawatir or Hadith mutawatir say so. Where it is not in Hadith mutawatir, then what is the next evidence? Depends on the madhab. Why? Because now you're going into dhanni territory. So Maliki will consider after Hadith mutawatir, Amal of Ahl al-Madina as the next highest priority. Shafi would look at ijma. The Hanafis would look at istihsan. The Hanbalis would look at ahad hadith. Like they differ after. From here, that's why we say here, calm down. Okay, yeah. The moment you pass this line, calm down. The Quran and Sunnah already make it clear we are brothers. We are brothers. Don't break that brotherhood because of dhanni. Are we together? Yeah. The evidence that we are brothers comes from Quran. This is what atasimu bihablillahi jamia and all of that. This is clear. We all agree on that one. Don't break brotherhood. Do not allow dhanni, ijtihad, dhanni thubut, dhanni dilala to undermine something that is qat'i thubut and qat'i dilala. Like, it doesn't make sense. Al-yaqeen la yazulu bishak. You don't overrule what you are certain about using something that has lower grade of evidence. So one of the things we teach our young people is to just give example. Let's say the question is, can you eat kangaroo? Kangaroo. Is it halal or haram? I don't like eating kangaroos, but just eating is mu'amalat. Everything is halal except what is haram. So the default, everything is halal. If you want, you ask, is it haram? So you are looking for evidence for haram. Is it haram with a level of certainty from Quran? Yes? No, we don't have anything in the Quran against eating kangaroo. So the answer is no. Anything in mutawatir hadith? Nothing. Saying don't eat kangaroo. So it's no. We go to ahad hadith. Anything in ahad hadith saying you can't eat kangaroo? Nothing. So no. We go to the other tools of ijtihad and the maqasid and the safety nets. We go to ijma and qiyas and istihsab. We go to all of them. Any evidence that it is haram? If the answer is no, then no evidence there, then we go back to asl, ibaha. Okay, permissibility. So this is how to find evidence for haram, not finding evidence for halal. Halal is default. Al-asl is ibaha. Allah says, halaka lakum everything fil sama'i wal ard, sahara lakum this and that. He has made permissible for you this and that. It's all for you. Haram needs evidence now. Not halal. Halal has already been given evidence. So you don't say, what is the evidence for this to be halal? No, it's halal by default in mu'amalat. But let's take an example. Can you eat a lion or a tiger? Okay? Everything is halal except what is haram. We need evidence with some level of certainty. So we'll start looking Quran. Is there anything in the Quran that says you can't eat a lion or a tiger? Quran? Quran. No, that's in the hadith. Quran? No, exactly. Okay. So anything in the Quran saying you can't eat tiger or lion? Nothing. Anything in hadith mutawatir? None. Anything hadith ahad? Yes. So you have the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, any bird of prey, birds of with claws, or animals that have canine teeth, carnivorous animals, they eat meat, you are forbidden from eating. Okay? So carnivorous birds, carnivorous animals, haram to be eaten. But because it's ahad hadith, so the answer, yes, there's evidence. But because it's ahad, you have divided opinions. For the Shafi and the Hanbali, ahad hadith is enough to make haram. So in Shafi and Hanbali madhab, it is haram. In Hanafi madhab, ahad hadith cannot make haram. It can only make makruh tahrimi. So they consider it makruh tahrimi. Maliki, ahad hadith cannot make haram unless it is supported by Amal Ahl al-Madinah. Because it is not supported by Amal Ahl al-Madinah, they say it is makruh. Are we together? Because in the Amal of Ahl al-Madinah, they have some of the Sahaba that ate hyena. Some ate a fox. So Malik looks at it as we do not have support for this hadith from Amal. So to him, he can't make it makruh. Sorry, he can't make it haram, so he makes it makruh. This just to demonstrate that it's not that the Hanafis and the Malikis don't know about the hadith. Yeah. They just differ in the weight they give each evidence. But that's how it is on so many issues. The moment you move down this line into dhanni, and the madhabs kick in with their tools, they give things different weights. And this is where, because the madhab equation is respected by the scholars, you just respect the answer. You're not comfortable with, but you respect the difference of opinion. So, key point we try to make young people understand. This line here means calm down. Go and cool down, or they say chill. Yeah, they say chill. Yeah, go get a shower. Don't break brotherhood. Don't insult. Don't do takfir. Just calm down. Why? Because scholars greater than yourself will disagree with you. And you can't takfir them, you can't fasik them, you can't, don't break brotherhood based on zanni. This is where we say, Wallahu alam. Allah knows best. Imam Shafi would say, I believe my answer is right. And the answer of the other person is wrong. With the possibility that I am wrong. And he is right. There's that possibility. So again, just to summarize, this is where we say, calm down. Okay? So here, on mu'amalat, issues to do, is this haram, is it fard? Everything halal except what is haram. If it's not qat'i thubut, qat'i dilala from the Quran, or qat'i dilala from hadith mutawatir, calm down, because differences will begin. Yeah. So we then touch quickly on the maqasid of Sharia, and it is usually described in two ways by, he's called his nickname Sultan al-Ulama, Al-Iz bin Abdul Salam, an important Shafi scholar who made a lot of contribution in this area, where he summarized the maqasid of Sharia into two sentences. Jalbul Masalih and Dar'ul Mafasid. Very simple. Like Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy al Munkar. That the whole of Sharia is to bring benefit to you in this life and the hereafter, and keep away harm in this life and the hereafter. Very simple way of classifying maqasid into two. That every ayah, every hadith you do, this one is either, it's maybe act on ibadah, trying to increase your taqwa. Kutiba alaykum as-siyam, kama kutiba alladhina min qablikum, la'allakum tattaqun. Ya ayyuhan nasu ubudu rabbakum alladhi halakakum walladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. So we find acts of ibadah, even though many of them are not ma'qul, they are not things that you can rationally say, why 2 rakahs, why this, why this, why this? But it's explained as la'allakum tattaqun. So there's a spiritual faith-lifting role that acts of ibadah play. And so if you look at Hujjatullah al-Baliga of the Indian gentleman, Waliullah al-Dahlawi, okay, he looked a lot into this area of the wisdom behind both ibadat and mu'amalat. Imam al-Ghazali, in his book on Inner Dimensions of Worship, would look at the benefit of various acts of Hajj and fasting and all of these things. So, but most of the scholars, when they are talking on the maqasid Sharia, they are talking mainly on mu'amalat. Mainly on mu'amalat, not on ibadah. So they're not saying it doesn't have, but just for the purpose of fiqh and lawmaking. So two major objectives: promotion of maslahah, promotion, protection of good, and prevention, avoidance of harm, evil, or suffering. Examples: maqasid in ibadah, aqidah, we have already touched on this, and the importance of maqasid on the map of ijtihad. Maqasid is always important like a compass. If you don't know where you are, how useful is a map? Think about it. I ask you, where are you? You say, I'm lost. I don't know where I am. Here's a map.
No.
Will it help you? Good. Then, you know where you are, but you don't know where you want to go. Can a map help you? How will the map help you? To go where? You don't even know where you want to go. He himself. Okay. In other words, even if you have a map, if you don't know where you want to go, any road is as good as any other road. Okay? Yeah. And that is why maqasid is very important. Where does Sharia want us to go to? Yeah, it's very important to have that very clear in our heads. Where does Sharia want us to go to? Not where do we think it wants us to go to, not where do we want to go to, no. But by looking at the ayat of the Quran and Hadith, where does Sharia want us to go to? So it takes us back to this issue of what is the commander's intent. So Ibn Qayyim's discussion, which we quoted earlier, about justice, mercy, wisdom, and good. That the whole of Sharia is about maslaha and benefit of humanity in this world and the hereafter. And he mentions these four things. If we are to, actually, we're moving a bit quickly, but let me just pause a little for a while. If we look at how, if we look at how the scholars classify the maqasid, they then reclassify them into 5 categories, what they call the daruriyat khamsa. Okay? Others like Imam Shatibi, Ibn Taymiyyah expand on them. That is not limited to just 5 or 7. So they would say hifdhuddin, protection of faith, and everything to do with protection of faith. Okay? Prayer, iman, all of that. Then protection and promotion of life. Okay? So we need security, we need agriculture, we need healthcare, we need anything that will help keep life going. Prohibition of murder, any of that. No poisoning, no suicide, all protection of life. Then preservation, promotion, and protection of the intellect. So talab al-ilm is fard, the search for knowledge is compulsory. The prohibition of narcotics or drugs or intoxicants, anything that will mess up how the aql operates. Why? Because it's with the aql that you are able to follow the guidance. Otherwise, you don't belong to taklifiyah. You know, you don't belong to somebody that is responsible. Then all the halal and haram doesn't apply. So aql is really important. The Quran is liqawmi yaqilun, liqawmi ulul albab, liqawmi yatafakkarun. So you have to make sure that is working. We need educated ulama. We need scholars of not just fardu ayn, but also fardu kifaya. Like healthcare is a fardu kifaya. Military is a fardu kifaya. Security is a fardu kifaya. Electricity has now become a fardu kifaya. Why? If you don't provide electricity, what will happen? Will anybody die? Yeah. Many people in hospital will start to die. Yeah. People get, exactly. Some are on intensive care units. Okay. So if something will make people go into darura, then it is a fard to get them out. Ad-darar yuzal. You must take that, whatever. And whatever is prerequisite for a fard is also treated as a fard. Okay. Ma la yatimul wajib illa bihi, fahuwa wajib. If getting doctors is a wajib, then educating doctors is a wajib. And if learning chemistry and physics and biology is a wajib, is necessary for being a doctor, then they become wajib too. So the whole means, the whole wasail towards something that's wajib is also wajib. So as a society, when we say al-umur bi maqasidiha, when we talk about the maqasid of Sharia, we're talking about all those things that the Quran and the Sunnah put as our maqasid. We may have professions that fulfill these things. Protection of family and lineage and children and wealth and property or mal and all that goes into that area. And then what our brother is involved in, the standards. The standards. It's not enough that you provide healthcare or you provide education, any standard. If we close down education, will anybody die? No? Yes? You said no. It's just a matter of time, right? Yeah, it's just a matter of time. Yeah. People start dying in hospital. Why? The doctor is not good. Yeah. The level of the nurses, all sorts of things will start going down. You are very right. Yeah. No knowledge, no jobs, no this, no that. It'll be terrible. Yeah. No good police. Gangs go up. You know, it's fitna. May Allah protect us. So, all of this is on that. Ibn Qayyim's quote. So, in the maqasid, they rank the maqasid. Okay? Those things that belong to the daruriyat at the bottom. Okay? We mean daruriyat, necessities. You must provide them. Okay? Medicine must be provided. food must be provided. It's essential for life. But you have the hajiyat, not haja, hajiyat here, as essentialities to support the daruriyat. So while medicine for the sick man is a darura, the existence of hospitals and school of medicine is a haja. If you don't have that, we will have serious darura. Yeah. Tahsiniyat are those comfortable things. We can manage without them. Yeah. Luxuries, etc. Yeah, now. So what we will do, we've got just a few more slides to go. Sorry? Yeah, we can. How many minutes between adhan and 10? Okay, so maybe another 5 minutes. 5, 7 before. Okay.